Gotta go, gotta go, gotta go. I'm so behind, I'm so behind. Hey man, what are you so behind on? Man, how am I going to learn anything if I can't do anything? Have you tried teaching? Dude, what are you talking about? Don't you know that people who teach can't do anything? That's why they teach. Well, I know the material very well and I've never done anything with it. After all, we're still just in our first year of med school. Stop being a nerd, man. Don't you know all that head knowledge is just holding you back?
Hey guys, why don't you just do both?
So I don't know if any of you guys actually knew that, but the correct answer is yes, you should do both. So that's it for this week. I'll see you guys in the next video where we talk about National Book Lovers Day. Anyways, study less, play more. Hey guys, what are you still doing here? I mean, that's the end of the video. What, did you want more, like a whole in-depth thing on pros and cons and whatnot of studying? Okay, I guess we can do that. First, let's talk about how teaching helps you learn. Now, I have 4 pros for how teaching helps you learn. The first one is there's very little risk to screw this up, and it's pretty easy to do. It's also a bit faster learning this way. But only a bit. There's not really a lot of an advantage there. It forces you to organize the information in such a way that it simplifies all of it and makes it so you can take in more of it easier. Now let's talk about that last one for a second. When most people are learning, they'll reach a plateau where they learn a lot and then it kind of just stops and stays the same. This happens because your brain starts trying to juggle too many things, and you reach a point where your brain just can't keep track of everything. But when you start teaching it, that forces your brain to simplify things and clump them together into more easily understandable segments where you can use them. This means you can do more with it faster. Now I know what some of you are saying, couldn't I just make an effort of simplifying the information while I'm doing it? And yes, to an extent you can, but you have more of a tendency, because you're working with your brain and not trying to convey it to somebody new, to keep it more complicated. And you can never really completely get rid of that until you start trying to teach it. Now we have the very last pro I have here, and that's that it will reveal problem areas you have to you. A lot of times when you're just doing, you'll end up compensating for something or working around your weakness with it, despite the fact that you don't actually have all the skills to be as good at it as you could be. It very easily gets revealed when you start teaching because somebody will inevitably ask you a question on the thing you don't know. So what about the cons of teaching to learn? Is it all good news or is there some bad? Well, you're right, there is some bad. Teaching to learn does have a few downsides. For starters, some of the information you're going to be learning is just plain wrong. I've actually come across quite a few people who have PhDs who just teach wrong information. I've read their book and they miss simple definitions. You'd think they wouldn't even have Google because Google has a more accurate thing than they do. I mean, like, first year stuff, they're just completely missing. And when all you're doing is teaching, you often don't notice that it's wrong because you don't get to actually test it and see, oh, this just doesn't work. Lastly, we often get a lot of theory, which, while it might be factually correct, doesn't actually give you any sort of real-world skill. It doesn't help you accomplish any of the goals you're trying to accomplish. It's just a fact. Sometimes theories just aren't helpful at all. A great example of this would be in management classes. They often teach you about this open door policy idea. Now, anybody who has ever managed anything ever immediately tells you that is a horrible idea, because you can suddenly never get any work done. Your entire job revolves around everybody coming into your office to ask you for help and a question and can I have a minute of your time. I know one story about a guy who implemented the open door policy because everybody kept telling him it was such a great idea. And by the end of a week, he was going to the zoo to get his work done because he had less people disturbing him at the zoo. And after that, it still took him a few weeks to realize, hey, I shouldn't do that. So what about learning by doing? What about the pros and cons there? I'm glad you asked. So let's start with pros. The first and most important pro is you actually see when something is wrong. And I mean, you see this fast. So let's stop and give an example on this. My dad taught me how to drive. Now, most of the stuff he did pretty well, but there was one thing he really screwed up on, and that one thing was turning.
What? How do you turn wrong? Don't you just turn the wheel?
Oh, my young Padawan, no. You also need to have the car be moving forward as you turn the wheel. But in this case, the problem was actually speed. You see, my dad kept telling me that as you are turning the wheel, you need to push on the accelerator. Now, anybody who thinks about this for 10 seconds will immediately go, no, that's not what you do when you turn the wheel. But I'm going to break this down for you so all of you can easily understand it. If you're cruising down the road at 50 miles an hour and you realize, I left my car, or I left my lunch at home, I've got to make a U-turn now. Do you turn the wheel and slam on the accelerator so you're going 100 miles an hour? Or do you put on that brake and then turn the wheel when you're going at 10? Obviously, you go at 10 miles an hour when you're starting to make a U-turn, not 100, because you'll flip your car. But my dad couldn't figure this out. After we started trying to learn to turn, my dad spent 2.5 hours telling me I wasn't pushing the accelerator hard enough when I was turning the wheel. And finally he took the wheel and I got in the passenger seat and I watched what he was doing, and believe it or not, when he started to turn the wheel, he'd pump on the brakes and slow down the car. But he couldn't understand that until he started actually doing it. Sorry, Dad. You know I love you. Before we go any farther, I would like to remind you to like and subscribe if you like this video. And you can check out my blog in the link below, studylessplaymore.com. And the question of the week this week is a very important one. Do you struggle more with teaching or doing when you're trying to learn? Which one gives you more trouble? Comment below for more. So the next big pro, in my opinion, is you get a direct translation of what you're learning into skills. When you're doing a lot of book learning, oftentimes you still won't build up the skills to actually do anything with what you're learning. Now, take this example for me for a second. I've studied a few surgeries. I've never done any of them, but I was interested in them, so I learned a little bit about them, how they do them, why they do what they're doing. But would you want me to do the surgery for you? Or would you want a surgeon who's done that surgery a couple hundred times? Now, don't get me wrong, I might be able to assist if it's an emergency and there's a doctor there who knows what they're doing, but I'm not qualified to do the surgery because I've, this is important, never done it. So I don't have the skills to do it. So those are the big pros. What about the cons? Well, there's really only one con to learning by doing. And that one con is it can be a bit dangerous. And if you think about this, you kind of know this. What's the chance of you getting hurt if you go and read a book on exercise? Probably pretty small, almost non-existent. On the other hand, if you actually go out and exercise, your chance of getting injured from exercise go up exponentially. Same thing with, say, the economy. If you go out and get a book on investing in Wall Street, you probably won't get any poorer from it, particularly if you go to the library to get the book. But if you go out and actually invest $2,000 into Wall Street, you might end up losing some money. So there you have it, the pros and cons of learning by doing and learning by teaching. I still recommend that you do both because one's really not better than the other. They both work very well together. But that's it for this video. I'll see you next week where we celebrate a very important day to study less, play more. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and remember, study less, play more.